Welcome to the Men After God podcast, where you will be challenged and encouraged as you pursue God, achieve success, and raise a thriving family. Join your host, Dustin, and his guests on a weekly journey to grow as husbands, fathers, and men after God. Here is your host, Dustin Alley.
Hey guys, welcome back to another week of the Men After God podcast. I'm excited to have a friend of mine named Jay Nepomuceno with us today, and he's going to have a great discussion with us on mental health. I believe May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Is that right, Jay?
Yes, sir.
It is. So this is a perfect time to be recording as it is early in the month of May. And I'm excited to get into this topic because mental health is something I grew up. I don't even know if I knew anything about it. And then coming from a Marine's perspective, what I thought about it was shut up, pick yourself up, and just keep moving forward. Yeah. And while there may be a time and place for that when it comes to battle or something of that nature that the Marine Corps is training me for, I tell you guys, that's not a great way to live your day-to-day life. And I know Jay and I are going to get into this topic, and I know it's going to be a blessing to you. But before we do, Jay, thanks for being on here, man. And just go ahead and introduce yourself to the guys. Talk about your family and a little bit about your journey, how you came into this space to being, like a subject matter expert when it comes to mental health.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Dustin. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been in ministry for about 25 years. I'm an assistant pastor. I don't have any ambitions of being a lead pastor at all, and I feel that's my calling. I'm currently the care pastor of Liberty Baptist Church in Newport Beach, California, and I'm also a certified mental health coach. I've been married to my wife Brenna for 28 years, and we have 4 children. Thank you. 26, 25, 23, and 21. Our oldest has autism, and he's part of my mental health journey. Actually, that's just been the truth is it's a unique life. I'm sure, being in ministry and raising a special needs child, so that's part of it. And I'm passionate about the subject of mental health because I struggled with depression and anxiety, and it cost me my ministry. I was a full-time youth pastor for 18 years. And during our last missions trip, one of our young men drowned during the trip.
Oh my gosh!
It was on my watch, right? And I just couldn't get over that. The honest truth, this was 10 years ago, 2014. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever fully get over that. But that just snowballed into this monster of depression and anxiety and panic attacks. And in 2018, I stepped away from the ministry. So it cost me my ministry. I got the help I needed. I went into therapy, and I know people have strong opinions about that. Interestingly, most people never been in therapy and have really strong opinions about it. But that's what I needed, and so my in between times, what we called it, outside of ministry, all I have is my ministry degrees. I drove Uber, delivered groceries through COVID, as I healed and watched God provide, and just furthered my education, and just really want to pass on how God comforted me, right? 1 Corinthians, Corinthians 1:4, right? And so I want to pass that on to as many people as I can, and so that's where we are now, and God's doing some pretty neat things with it.
Wow, that is an amazing story. I cannot wait to dive further into that. Let's talk for just a minute about the therapy piece. That one, I was one of those, had never been to therapy and never said anything good about therapy until I finally went to a therapist and talked to him. Let's try to dispel some myths and some just negative ideas some men might have about therapy. What are some of the more common excuses you hear about men, or just, our target audience is men here. So, about men going to therapy and the reasons they won't go.
Yeah, I think the first thing is just this idea that all therapy is going to be rooted in Freudian psychology. And that's just not so. The problem is with human beings, it'll always be a challenge to find really any part of life, right? It's a challenge to find the right contractor or a dentist or accountant, but even with the right therapist. And that all Christian psychologists or therapists are, in essence, integrationists in the worst form of the word. And I think that's the first challenge that we have is that fear of Freudian psychology, which, that would be legitimate. But the truth is, a good counselor, a good therapist is using biblical principles, whether they know it or not.
Yes.
Just principles of healing from bitterness, right? Reframing your pain. These things, the healing power of just talking. These truly are biblical principles, and so I found it to be powerful. And the truth is, I've seen the good, bad, and ugly of the whole spectrum of counseling, of biblical counseling, Christian counseling, therapy. I've been with not so great therapists, but eventually I needed some specialized training, someone who has a specialty in PTSD, things like that. The truth is, with the drowning happened on a beach, for maybe a year or so, whenever I heard a helicopter, there was a search helicopter, my heart would race, right?
Oh, wow.
I couldn't step on, I still can't step onto any beach if it's too familiar, it's too flat. So I still have some memory markers in my brain, right?
Yeah.
And so as pastors, we need to stay in our lane, right? If we're not at least trauma informed, let's stay in our lane, right?
I think that's huge. Staying in our lane. That's one thing. When I first got here as a lead pastor, I was asked about counseling and things, and I'm the pastor. I have to counsel, right? I have to. I was 32 years old. I'd spent 9 years in the Marine Corps. I have a master's of religious education and biblical studies. When I started that program, they called it a master's in Bible. And I was like, okay, I like that. That's simple. That's easy. That's more descriptive of, what I want. Then they changed their program name. But nonetheless, I had one counseling class, and it was one counseling class, and we'll just say it that way. And so when I started doing it, I'm really just, winging it. And it took me probably about 6 months to a year because COVID happened. So within the year, I realized I can't do this. This is not, I'm not wired this way. I'm not educated this way. I'm going to outsource counseling. And that was something I had to come to terms with and be okay with. But I love that of staying in our lane. And I like what you said about you got to find the right contractor. You got to find the right person to work with you. That's true in therapy. Just to be transparent, like I've spoken with 4 different therapists over the last few years, and just going through and figuring out like, okay, which one can work with me best? And none of them were terrible, obviously people or in their own profession, but it just they weren't the ones for me. And so I love how you brought that up. That's great. And so some other excuses, other than the Freudianism that I could think of, would be how it's a spiritual matter, and I need to talk about it with God, not anyone else.
Right.
And talk about that for just a minute.
Yeah, there's always going to be a spiritual component to our healing, but it's not always a spiritual issue that causes someone's depression or anxiety. And there's physiological components to it, and it's not always. And now on this side of it, as I have opportunity to speak on the subject and help as many people as I can, I'm just asking, especially church leaders, Christian counselors, to not broad brush the subject. It could be that someone's personal sin has led them into depression, but not necessarily. It could be someone doesn't have enough faith and that's causing their anxiety, but not necessarily. Let's not broad brush the subject. It's more complex than we might realize, and really dig in. The Bible does say, if we answer a matter before we hear it, it's foolishness, it's folly to us. And so let's really seek to understand the subject and to understand people, the baggage they carry into these seasons.
I think that is wonderful. And that is one thing. I grew up in a little bit of an over spiritualized environment, and where everything, and we know all good gifts come from God, right? But everything, was from the God. But if it was a bad thing, then it was obviously from Satan. Like no matter what it was from Satan. And when in reality, I look back and go, that wasn't okay. I mean, it was the devil involved. Okay, sure. But honestly, it was your own stupid decisions that led to this situation, and some of that can play a part in dealing with the anxiety and the depression. Because I think a lot of guys, and talking to myself here, and really where the book came from, we especially type A driven, ambitious, we put ourselves so much on ourselves in achievement or things of that nature. We put our bodies and our minds in a place to where they have no choice but to be anxious or maybe depressed because of a failure or something of that nature. Have you encountered that in men, of guys just going 120 miles per hour until they eventually hit a brick wall?
Yeah, that's it. I would say 80-90% of men that reach out to me, they can't pinpoint one traumatic event, and they'll come to me embarrassed. It's like, man, Jay, nothing happened to me like you. And first, I want to say, the Bible does say that if we compare ourselves among ourselves, it's not wise. Your pain, your struggle is precious to God as well. But most people, they come to me, they have no idea what's happened. And the truth is, they're just more than likely, they're living in some type of chronic stress. And this may sound silly, but now as I coach people up in their mental health journey, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to help them find a hobby, right? Trying to encourage them to max out their vacation time, to intentionally, right? I mean, max it out. Take your day off. There's seasons where it's busy, no doubt, but take your day off. Spend time with your wife and kids, and change the mindset. It's not just that our kids need us. Here's the truth: we need our kids. We need that energy, right? That positivity, that innocence, just that fun, that silliness. We as men, we need our 4, 5, 6-year-old kids. And oftentimes in seasons in life, maybe more than they need us. I'm not trying to say don't be a good dad, but we need a mindset change. We need them as well.
Absolutely, which is why it's so important to, we want to make time to play with our kids and to be with our kids, no matter their age. But that piece of how they pour into us and how they impact us, I think, is often overlooked because
absolutely.
we're trying to derive, I don't know if I'd say value, pleasure, happiness, joy, something from another area, when God has given us just these amazing gifts of children and spouse that can really, and literally, I mean, our wife was made to be a helpmeet to us and help complete us there in Christ. And so got to find that in the home. Man, that is so good.
There is so much healing power by spending time with our families. So we need to intentionally prioritize that.
So I got a book and part of it talks about that right there. 5 areas a man needs to keep in focus in his week. And the second one is devote time to your family. That one, that can literally change your life. So let's move forward in the conversation. So we're talking about men's mental health here today. And when we go to therapy, say we go to a therapist or something of that nature, let's talk about this way, because I've actually seen a non-Christian therapist, and I had to. Now, again, I don't think I should go to anyone. It's pretty well established. Hey, I'm a pastor. I'm this, and stuff. And what would you recommend to someone who either maybe doesn't have the finances or the access to a Christian therapist, but it has their insurance or whatever, can access a non-Christian therapist? Some things that you think are important for them to keep in mind as they have a conversation with them.
A couple things. First of all, don't be afraid of using what would be considered an associate therapist, someone who's still in training. I've worked with those types, though they're still really in the training process. In order to get licensed, these folks obviously invest a lot in their education, but the licensing procedure is incredible. They go through 3,000 hours of supervised counseling. So literally, by the time they get counseled, they've pretty much heard it all. It's pretty amazing. And so it is, you're always going to take a chance with, I can tell you horror stories of biblical counselors, for me, that literally almost destroyed me. So you're going to there's always a step of faith involved. And you just feel it out. And if you just feel like, a good counselor, psychologist, even someone who's not a faith-based counselor, they're supposed to encourage you along and find the best parts of your faith journey, they might call it. They're not supposed to drive you away from that, right? They're supposed to help you process your thoughts properly in light of your faith journey. So if you get the feeling that they're opposed, they're completely opposed, you get a sense of that. You change therapist, right? Just like you would change your any other service. industry in your life. So it's got to be taken with some discernment for sure. I do believe that if you could find a Christian therapist, I think that's ideal. My therapist was also, he pastored the same church for 37 years, one church for 37 years.
Wow.
And, but he was a licensed psychologist, worked with Marines outside of 29 Palms here in California. And that's one of his specialties was PTSD. So, so that was part of he was the one that really led me out of this and mentored me in my new mental health ministry. So yeah, that's the ideal. But yeah, you can get a sense if a therapist is against your faith, your religion, so to speak. Got to be really careful about that.
Absolutely. I've had, the conversations I've had with them. There's been, a couple situations where, and I don't know if it's Freudianism or what type of philosophy it was. It's humanistic in the sense of like, well, that's what you want to do, then you should do it. Like, well, right. But the Bible says this. And he looked at me and he said, so your faith is absolute? Well, it should be. I mean, I don't get it perfect all the time, but in this instance, there's some pretty clear cut stuff here, based on the topic we were discussing. But that was. So I love what you said there. The other thing you mentioned, not being afraid of. I can't remember exact words, but I was going to say, don't be afraid to push back. And challenge the thought, because the great thing is the Bible is truth. And truth will come out in the end. Because if you can challenge the thought and then you move forward with the biblical truth, counsel, principle that you take, and then see the situation resolve as God intends for it to resolve, then you can go back and that can actually be a witness to them. Now, I'm not telling you to use your therapy as an evangelism opportunity. You're there for you and really taking care of your own health. But that is something I've had in mind as I've spoke with mine. And so absolutely. Man, so you were that youth pastor that had this tragic event, and you said you were Ubering and Door Dashing and stuff through COVID. But now you seem on the other side of that journey there as an assistant pastor and the subject matter expert of mental health. Talk about that transition back into ministry and what that was like for you.
Here's God. I've been in Southern California preaching, serving for so long. Obviously you get to know people and pastors, and there are just some good men around here. And when they heard about me resigning, a number of them reached out, and just, it was done, unfortunately, mysteriously, just from the church I'd come from. Mental health's not talked about. And so they thought they were doing me a service by keeping it secret. For me, I was like, I was just desperate to, I wanted everyone to know I didn't disqualify myself. I didn't, you know what I mean? It wasn't some sin that they're trying to hide. But they were trying to protect me from the stigma of depression and anxiety. So I left in this secret cloud. I'm so thankful for a few pastors that reached out and said, hey, what's going on? Can we help you? And they told me, hey, if you want to get back into preaching, let's do that. I'll have you in our school chapel or on Wednesday night or what have you. And I did. I was desperate to. It took some time. It was maybe a year and a half before I was back at the pulpit. But then that started to be open about it. My story got out, and the man that I'm working for now, my pastor, Ryan Thompson here at Liberty Baptist Church in Newport Beach, he was one of the first men to reach out and said, hey, we need someone to talk about this. And would you be willing even just to give a testimony? That's where it started. And then he reached out to the pastor I was under at the time and says, hey, can this guy preach? And like my pastor, Brian Pattison, Victory Baptist Church, said, yeah, he can preach.
Hey, I know Brian.
Sunday morning. Yeah. Do you know Brian?
I do know Brian. Brian came down to Freedom Baptist down in Yuma, and before they opened the school up there, because we had opened hours and we were having some conversations and stuff around getting that going. And so,
that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, I needed him. He was our in-between time.
He's a good guy.
And I just needed his friendship. And so he helped me through that. And then, so I'm glad that he vouched for me and told Ryan, yeah, he can preach. You can have him on a Sunday morning. You can have him anything. And then, so we just started to pray about that. And I did my first mental health Sunday here at Liberty in 2019. And I said, Lord, I want to be back in ministry. If this is what you want me to do, maybe this is what we'll do. And then, so COVID hit 2020. I had some meetings set. And I'll tell you that if you're going to start a mental health ministry, you start it during a pandemic, right? Because we're doing everything wrong, right? We're isolating, we're quarantining. We're designed by God for community. So we're doing everything wrong, and so everybody's mental health issues just came to the surface, and then we couldn't ignore it anymore. And so just by word of mouth, people, I'm nobody, I know that, but people's like, there's this guy that he was in ministry. Now he was out. Now he's talking about it. And so, and what God has done with it, it's just a blessing. And I honestly, I just want to help as many people as I can. Just help me articulate what depression feels like, what a panic attack feels like, just what the Bible says about our pain, and just this interest, this unique lens that God has given me on it, and what therapy can be, what it shouldn't be, what biblical counseling shouldn't be, right? And so that's what God has done with it, just to bring it full circle, and now to be the care pastor, the church that I started my mental health Sundays with, is just amazing. That's God.
I love it, man. I love it. I think that's so wonderful. Tell me about let's talk about it. Let's talk about what depression feels like, what anxiety feels like, what a panic attack feels like, those things that are on your heart there. Whichever one you want to start with, let's start and let's have a discussion on it.
Yeah. So with depression, it's not always just that you're constantly sad. For me, the best way to describe it, there's this inherent heaviness that's just always there. You can pop out of it for a time. You could laugh and it's real. You could smile and enjoy people for a time and it's real, but it's like your default setting is heaviness, right? And when you go back to whatever the normal routine is, that heaviness is there. You wake up and you're heavy, and just that's depressing. I remember I would just wake up and just already feel the heaviness, and just it would just knock you down some more, thinking, man, nothing's changed. It's just the same. And then, especially as a believer, you continue to walk with God. And I promise, if you're in depression, you pray more than you've ever prayed. And it's frustrating when people say you need to pray more. So I promise you, now I know what it means to pray without ceasing, because this heaviness is always there reminding you to pray. You're so desperate. And so there's all this heaviness, and then you can't sleep. For me, I couldn't sleep. And so that makes things worse, right? When you're tired.
Yeah.
And then alone with your thoughts in the middle of the night, desperate to sleep. This thing just snowballs. The panic attacks, I was in denial about that for a while. I just thought I was having heart issues or what have you. Because, here's the truth. I just thought panic attacks were just for women, for females. And that's horrible, right? But but that was just my thinking. It was like, no way. But so it took me some time to acknowledge the anxiety and realize, that's physiology. I wasn't consciously concerned that someone was going to drown, but I learned that when I heard ambulance siren, my body was reacting to that and reacting to a really tragic memory, and that's why I would get nauseated. My heart would race. So things like that, and just really learning about the physiology of anxiety and panic attacks. There was healing in that, and understanding it, how I can manage it, that part of it. So there's both. There's a spiritual component to it, grabbing hold of my thoughts, but there's a physical component to it, breathing exercises, things like that, single point focus. There's a lot you can talk about, just to calm the system so my prayers can make sense, so I could rationally think through things, right? So there's both sides of it.
So I want to go back to depression for just a minute, because some of the things you said, I want to ask, so you said you woke up with this heaviness. Were you able to articulate what the heaviness was, or was it just a feeling you had? Was it, just a general everything you thought about or was around was heavy? How would you more descriptively tell someone what that was like?
Yeah, and they're not necessarily the challenge, especially of understanding it, because we all understand sadness and grief. Depression's a whole different monster. It's not necessarily connected to a conscious thought. It's just your default setting of your brain, of your emotions. So you're going through your day and just not even thinking, and not thinking about the drowning, not thinking about any of the things, but just this heaviness that's always there. Everything takes more effort. Getting out of bed takes more effort. And so it's always there. And then of course, when the thoughts would come in, about the drowning, other people who are struggling, different things, of course, they just hit you hard. And so the ferocity, intensity with which I would cry was just a different level than I'd ever experienced in my life. And I don't know, sometime along the journey, a few months, I knew it was different than discouragement. And it was really scary. So it's like, am I depressed? I've heard people talk about it, but I think I am. And so, that's what that heaviness, not necessarily to frustrate, not necessarily connected directly to specific thoughts, but just always there. And do you find
I'm going to ask this. I kind of know the answer, but I really want to set you up to be able to talk for it. Does everyone respond to depression in the same way?
No, because we all carry different baggage into these situations, and so that's why we just shouldn't broad brush any healing trajectory, any growth trajectory, because we're all dealing with stuff and we carry different baggage into it. And then so as my counselor, my therapist really dug into what I was going into, it wasn't just about dealing with the drowning. Some of the baggage I carried was some of this anxiety that I was already living with raising our autistic son. And honestly, right at that time, he hit this growth spurt. The medication that he was on wasn't helping. And then he just started to have these physical rages. And our boy, he's 6'4", he's gotten up to 240 pounds. And when these things happen, they're literally dangerous situations for all of us. And so we had called 911, first responders over, spent nights in psychiatric units, very scary, difficult times.
Yeah.
So it was a bunch of different things. And so I was already dealing with that. And then this thing hit me, just knocked me down. I couldn't get myself up. I couldn't.
Wow.
The truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so with guys responding differently, you mentioned, I don't know if it was before we jumped on here or while we were recording, but not wanting to, we don't really sit around and talk about our feelings, right? That's just that's not the top of our list of things to do today,
Yeah.
Do you find that some respond with different emotions other than sadness? Can depression manifest itself differently in someone, or their response to it, if you will, rather than, the tears you were shedding? Do you see other ways that it shows?
Yeah. Frustration with God. That's just the truth. And you could study Job, right? God himself said that Job was spiritually mature, upright, all those things, right? He was frustrated. He asked God hard questions. Now, and we should have that freedom to do so, right? But always, of course, expect God to answer, right? And still, God, he's a big God. He can handle the hard questions. And God still blessed Job after it, even after losing his mind pretty much with frustration. And so, that's part of the process. And to be able to talk honestly with God about it, there's healing to that. He already knows what we're thinking anyway.
Yeah.
So might as well articulate it to him. But definitely it comes out as frustration, anger, right? All these things are part
Some
of it.
Irritability and things.
Yeah. And that manifested itself with me in my home. It was hard. It was hard for all of us.
Man. Yeah. And then your autistic son there at 6'4", 220. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Now that would be a struggle. So what was it like? What are some things? So did your spouse notice it in you before you did?
Yes, I believe so. She knew something was wrong. I wouldn't realize that I would stare. I would just kind of get into this trance, in essence, and she could pick it up. And so she knew I was thinking about, I was back on the beach, ocean shores. She knew when I was just there. I didn't realize what was happening. And part of that process was opening up to her. And so I didn't talk to her just because I was so embarrassed. I was even with my wife. I know this is ridiculous, but I was so sick of crying. And it was, like I said, there was an intensity, a ferocity to my tears that I was even embarrassed in front of my wife. And so that was part of the process, the difficulty, and just even in our marriage, it was very hard for her as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. And that's what I wanted to bring up, was my wife notices things in me before I even realize it. And the guys that are listening, listen to your wives. They know something. If they say something's up, listen to them. Go talk to somebody, and don't just dismiss that.
Absolutely. And honestly, that was with my therapist, the one that really led me into this. He kept me accountable to talking to my wife, because I wasn't talking to her. So like I said, it wasn't just that she needs me, I need her. There's a whole mindset change. There's a humility in this. I need her in this. She is my help. And so he kept me accountable to talking to my wife every day about what I was going through, what I struggled with. And so that was a huge part of my healing journey.
That's phenomenal. And what about, you mentioned you talked to guys about getting hobbies and different things of that nature. Did you find yourself withdrawing from a lot of just life during that time?
Yeah, and I didn't. That was just kind of part of, I guess, the ministry mindset. Unfortunately, that I was in, just kind of hard driving, all in ministry.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that my counselor asked me is like, "What I do for fun." I thought it was so odd, but now on this side of it, that's one of the first things I ask people. And here's the crazy thing. I was so embarrassed to say, well, I read, and it's like, well, what do you read? I read books about ministry and theology. Is like, man, you don't know, right? You don't know how to rest. That's one of the things I had to
Oh,
learn, is how to truly
yeah.
disconnect my mind from ministry. And so getting a hobby, just doing stuff just for the sake of having fun. That's it. And
Hmm.
disconnecting from ministry. That in and of itself was hard. Um,
Yeah.
but that was, I needed to learn how to rest my mind.
So I definitely, there's a chapter in my book called, again, the 5 things we have to keep in mind, I believe, to stay in balance and a good rhythm. And it's do nothing for Jesus. He said he is
I
the
love
Lord of
that.
the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man.
Yep.
Man was not man for the Sabbath, and he is the Lord of the Sabbath. So our rest is an act of worship.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote the book, and someone asked me, he's like, well, but do you live all this out? And I said, I do my absolute very best.
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
perfect? I am not. If
Right.
there's one of my 5 principles that I struggle with the most,
Mm-hmm.
rest.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I get asked that question, like, what do you do for fun? Well, I'll listen to like an audiobook or something. What's it about?
Yeah.
Mm, business,
Right.
ministry,
Yep.
stuff like
Yeah.
that. Or I used to golf when I was in Yuma, but I got spoiled
Mm-hmm.
out there, man. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
$20 to play all afternoon, or 18 for
Yeah.
18 during the summertime. They come up here to Connecticut, $60 green fees. Like, well,
Yeah.
and I lose a lot of golf balls too. Like, I am
Sure.
not one of like, mm-mm.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's a great question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do for fun? And there's
Yep.
seasons. I
Right.
want to
Yeah.
normalize a couple things, and one
Mm-hmm.
of them is there are seasons
Mm-hmm.
where you are going to be going 120
Yep.
miles an hour. It's
Absolutely.
life. It happens. I've got
Mm-hmm.
3 kids. They're in school,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them plays flag football practice Mondays and Fridays. My daughter plays soccer, practices on Tuesday evenings. My middle son plays soccer and practices on Thursday afternoons. And all 3 of them can end up having games on Saturdays. We go to church on Wednesday nights. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
for my dog chair right now. And, there's a few things on our plate, but it's a season, because sports is
Yeah.
going to end and the schedule's going
Right.
to open up.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for there's a couple months of my life where,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I'm going to have to be very intentional in maybe smaller moments of rest than maybe larger moments. But once the opportunity comes, you take those big moments and you maintain them and enjoy them, because the time with the
Absolutely.
kids, I love it. I'm helping coach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching them play,
Mm-hmm.
cheering them on. Like, that's part of life. You don't want to have to
Yeah.
rest from that part of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the second thing I want to normalize, and this is what I want to close our conversation out on, Jay, it was one thing you said. It's okay to not be okay,
Right.
but we can't stay there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What's the first step? All right, and really take this wherever you'd like for it to go. First step for someone who it recognizes, I'm not okay. Something's wrong. You don't have to know what it is, but just something.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it does start there with an acknowledgement. Asaph, we don't know much about him. Psalm 77, he's going through some type of depression. Something happened. He says, this is my infirmity. He acknowledged that there is something wrong. And really, you have to cry out for help. You have to talk to somebody. That's why God gave us the local church. Galatians, bear you one another's burdens. And that's how we fulfill the law of Christ. I mean, that's strong. We fulfill the law of Christ, not by evangelism. I'm not taking away from that, but by bearing one another's burdens. But you can't bear my burden if you don't know about it. So there has to be some humility in it to say, hey, I'm struggling in this. And then if we could normalize this in our churches to where we can freely ask for prayer and help for our depression and anxiety as we do for like our back issues, right? Nobody's embarrassed to say, hey man, would you pray for my back? Right? Nobody's embarrassed. Nobody judges anybody. But can we create a culture in our churches that says, it's okay if you're not okay. All right. But don't walk it alone. All right. And then you can ask for prayer for your depression, your anxiety. And that's something that we do. We can prevent a whole lot of huge things, or people running to the wrong types of therapy or counseling, and help people as best we can just by being good Christian friends. We can still, obviously there's a balance there. Stay in our lane. If somebody's dealing with major trauma, let's point them to the help that they need, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of this stuff, as believers, as local churches, we can bear burdens and help people through these things. We can.
Absolutely. And I think part of that goes to, discipleship. We often relegate discipleship to the academic transfer of information regarding what we believe and why we believe it. There's programs out there, good programs your church may be familiar with. I use them here, where it teaches the basic doctrines of the faith. And that's fantastic. Listen, it's not wrong to know those things, but discipleship is so much more than a transfer of information. And it's walking through life with someone, helping point them to Jesus in whatever it is that they're going through, and creating an environment to where that's discipleship, that's Christianity, that's living for Jesus, and just walking through life with people, meeting them where they are, and leading them to where Jesus wants them to be. Like that's clear.
Strong relationships is one of the most powerful preventative measures to mental dysfunction, and also one of the most powerful healing procedures. Just strong relationships. That's why God gave us the local church.
That's good. I love it. Awesome. Jay, we're going to close it out right there, my friend. Do me a favor. Can you let the people know how to get in touch with you if they need anything, or anything that you have to promo, or I don't know if you have a website. I know you got the Climb. I saw that, and it's exactly what that was, but you want to close out talking about that for a minute and let the guys know how they can chat with you?
Yeah. You could, on Facebook, look up the Climb Ministries. I do have a website, theclimbministries.com. I'm the care pastor at Liberty Baptist Church in Newport Beach. You can reach out to me that way. But I'd love to be help in any way I can to someone who's hurting, or coach some people up in helping your people that are struggling with depression and anxiety. It's real. We're doing better in our churches, but let's keep growing. Let's keep getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it, Jay. Thank you so much. Guys that are listening, listen, you were blessed today with a very transparent, vulnerable conversation around a topic that you probably don't hear too much about inside Christianity. I am thankful to say that I am more aware of conversations like this happening more often in recent years, which is just a great thing. I do believe COVID probably spurred a lot of that and really forced the church to do something it should have been doing a long time ago. And we get to be benefactors of the situation. But what you heard today, guys, take it to heart. If you're dealing with something, it's okay to be dealing with something. Don't deal with it alone. Yes, you have God right by your side, but don't forget your spouse. Don't forget your friends that are there with you in the local church. And then if you need someone to talk to professionally to work through what's happening, be sure to reach out. Again, he mentioned the Climb Ministries. You can reach out to Jay as best you can, and he'll probably try to connect you with somebody if he can. But go find help. Be what is it? I hate this. It's a kind of a humanistic term. But it would be the best version of yourself. I believe the best version of yourself is who God made you to be. And God did not make you to live in that state of depression where it impacts your kingdom impact in your family and in your local church. Guys, thanks so much for listening this week. We'll talk to you next week.